Hello everyone. Today's video is going to be on the speedometer. On this car, when I redid the car, I put a brand new speedometer in it. And again, you can't see in there, it's so dark in these black cars like that. And I used the old speedometer cable. It was a two-piece cable. Some of these cars had a two-piece speedometer cable because if you had cruise control, you'd screw one end of the speedometer cable into the cruise control box, and the other end would screw into it and go up to the speedometer. The other end would go down to the transmission, of course. So anyway, when I first got the car put all back together, I'd ordered a new speedometer cable. It hadn't come in yet, so I just put it together with the old one. And when I first got the car finished, the speedometer worked. It was about 3 to 6 miles an hour off, which I didn't really care. I could figure out my mileage, what I was going, just based on that. Well, I put 241 miles on the car, and I was coming home one day from an event, and I noticed the speedometer started jumping a little bit. And I thought, okay, that's weird. And by the time I got home, it quit moving completely. And so the next time I took it out and drove it, it went up and it started to work, and I went about 2 or 3 miles and it started jumping again. It dropped down, quit working completely. So my thought was I had an issue with the speedometer cable because I hadn't replaced that yet. And so I was able to disconnect the speedometer from the transmission and hook an electric drill to it and spin it, and I could test not only the speedometer but the cable, and it showed everything was working from that point on. So I knew I had an issue, something in the transmission. And in the meantime, I had ordered a new gear to go in the transmission to adjust the speedometer so it would read correctly. Okay, so I went and I thought, well, maybe the old gear was bad in there or something. So I went, when that new gear came in, I took the transmission, the part out of the transmission that holds the gear, I put the new gear in, put it all back together. It still didn't work. I did drive it, and if I got about 60, it would kind of come up to about 20 miles an hour for a little bit, and then it quit doing that too. So I've got something going on in the transmission that's causing the speedometer not to work. Now, if you never had a transmission apart or understand how they work, there's a round gear on the shaft, the output shaft of the transmission, and then there's gears. Let me get these gears here. These are the gears that go in the transmission. This is the one that was in there. It's a 19-tooth gear, and they're plastic. And this end, it goes into the transmission this way. This end sticks out towards the outside of the transmission, and the cable goes in, the square end of the cable goes in the hole in the end of this piece right here. I'm trying to show you, point out at the same time, I can't do it. Anyway, this gear seems okay. So I went from a 19-tooth gear, which this one is, down to a 17-tooth gear. And according to the book, let me pull it up on my phone here. I got a picture of it. Hang on a second. I don't know how well this is going to show up. But you can see there where it says these 4 gears, or I'm sorry, down below that, it shows 6 different gears, starting with a 17-tooth gear, which is purple, all the way down to a 22-tooth gear, which is silver. And right below that, it said, note, these 6 gears used with a 1.84 outside diameter circle gears. So that means that I don't have to change the gear inside the transmission to switch out between these 6 gears. It should still work. Now, the 19-tooth gear is kind of in the middle of the bunch there. That was what was in the car. And for every tooth, I believe it changes the speedometer 3 miles per hour. So I wanted to go 6 miles an hour, so I went to the 17-tooth. Now, what I'm hoping's happened, there's a couple things that could have happened. That's the reason it's not working anymore. Number one is this gear, the gear that I have in there is sitting down too low to mesh into that gear that's on the output shaft. And so it's just missing these teeth, and once in a while it'll catch it and spin it a little bit. I don't know if that's it or not. The other thing is that should be a steel gear on the transmission shaft. You can either have a steel gear or a plastic gear, but I'm pretty sure mine is a steel gear. And if it's a steel gear, they're pressed on the shaft. So if it's a plastic gear, they have like a keyway in the gear and a keyway in the shaft, and it's got this little metal, stamped metal clip that slips into that keyway in the gear and into a notch in the shaft, and that locks it in place on the shaft. Now, something that could have happened, if it does have a plastic gear, that gear could be stripped out, or that clip could have come out and the gear could have moved, or just spinning on the shaft. Now, when I had it part 4, I could put my finger in there and push on it, and I couldn't spin the gear on the shaft by hand, and I couldn't see up in there good enough to tell if it was a steel gear or not. I think it is, but the other possibility is that gear is about so wide, and it goes around the shaft this way, and it could have moved back and forth this way, so it's not centered on this gear. And if that's the case, it might be such a thing. If it's a steel gear, I can get something in there and pry it and just force it back centered on this gear, and we'll be fine again, even though it shouldn't move that easy. Or if it's a plastic gear and that clip came out, I can hopefully find the clip, get in there with something and push that clip back in place and lock the gear back on the shaft. So that's going to be what I'm going to be doing here on this video today. The problem is, as you know, these Corvettes sit like right down on the ground, so you can't get under them without jacking them up. What I normally do is I've got these 2 ramps. I put them under the front wheels, jack them, put them on the front wheels, and I jack up the back end and put jack stands under the back end, and that gets it up high enough to where I can get under work. It's still not high enough, but I can get the work done. And this will be the 3rd time again. So much of the stuff on this car I've had to do multiple times because I have more issues after I get it back together to think it's okay. But this will be the 3rd time I've had this part of the transmission apart. The first time I took it apart, when I went to pull the thing that holds this gear in the transmission, looks like a little bullet. When I pulled it out, this gear fell out and fell inside the transmission, or this gear did. This is the one that was in it. And it took me forever to get that back out. It was almost to the point where I thought about leaving it in there and hoping that it wouldn't jam into anything, because the only thing it could really get caught in is the reverse gear. And I was playing around with it, and I found if I could shift it back and forth from reverse back to neutral, this would hit this, and it finally popped it up to where I could get a hold of it, and I was able to get something around in it. And again, it was not that as easy, but I was able to get it out of there. I'm just looking at this, and I don't know if it'll show up. I see a little bit of wear on those teeth, and to me it almost looks like it would just barely catching it. So what I might want to do is that bullet, and I'll show it to you when we get it out of the car, but I might want to machine a new one of those and offset that hole like a 1/16 of an inch, and then when I put it back together I can rotate it until the teeth mesh properly, and then I can lock it into place. So that's another option I can look at doing on it. I'm hoping it's something simple like that and nothing really weird, but we shall see. So let me get the car jacked up and then we'll get back with you. Okay, so this is underneath the car. As you can see, this is the extension bracket I had to put on there to go from an automatic to a manual transmission. The rear transmission support is further forward on the 4-speed than it is on the automatic. You can see the difference between, I can't even tell if I'm pointing at anything here so far into the car, from these bolts to that area back there, right here. That's where the other transmission for the automatic, where the transmission mount will go. So what I do is I got to take this plate out of here, I got to take this out, I got to take this off, take my muffler clamps loose to get all that out of there, just so I can get into where the speedometer cable goes. And I don't know if you can see it there, it goes right up through there, and let me see if I can see that up in there. You can see the transmission, the speedometer cable there with the silver cap and the knurls on it for screwing it in. So I also have to drop this linkage, and that's the reverse linkage on the transmission. I got to drop it down to get it out of the way. So let me get all that stuff taken out of there, and I'll show you what it looks like once I get to that point. Okay, I've got this little retaining clip loose. It goes into a notch on that piece. I got the cable pulled out of that piece. I got it tucked up there. This is where the Speedometer cable screws in, right there where my finger's touching. So I should be able to pull that out. I call it the bullet because it's kind of bullet shaped. I'll show you when I pull it out. But let me get it out of there. Okay, so this is what I call the bullet. This is what holds this gear in the transmission in line with the gear that's in the transmission. And then, if I can do this. Well, this spins. There's a square in the end of that your speedometer cable goes into. And as you can see, as it spins your speedometer cable. But for some reason, this gear is not spinning, and I got to figure out why it's not spinning. It fits pretty good. I mean, it fits pretty good in the bore of this bullet. It doesn't feel like it's sloppy loose in there, so it's not like moving away from there. But I don't know why, but to me the teeth look kind of weird on it, like it was just barely meshing. Let me clean the oil off of it. Okay, I don't know how well this is going to show up in here. I'm trying to get this turned. I almost need a white background behind this here. Let me move this in a little closer here. Move this in a little closer. I don't know if that's going to focus in or not, but I'll try. If you look at the top edge of those teeth, don't it look like it's kind of round a little bit, like it just wasn't quite meshing all the way into the other gear, like it was just catching it. It actually wore a little bit off the top of the teeth. So that tells me it's not meshing deep enough into the other gear. I don't know if I can tell. This is the old gear. And you can kind of see the same thing. It looks like, see how it's worn down on top of the teeth on this right side of that tooth as I spin it around. I'm just thinking maybe it's not meshing in far enough. So what I think I'll do, these teeth are about a 1/16 deep. And if it's not meshing in far enough, then I need to go in up to a 1/16 of an inch. So my plan is to machine a new one of these and offset this hole a 1/16 of an inch. And then what I can do when I put it in the transmission, get this turned right, as I rotate it, it'll raise that gear up, and I can rotate it until it meshes in really good in the tooth. And then what locks it in there, it's got a notch on the side, and a little flat tab goes into that. So what I can do is I can get it rotated where I need it, mark it, and then take it out and mill a flat on it, put it back in, and hopefully when I put it in, it'll mesh deep enough that the teeth will hit. So let me get started on that, and I'll get back with you. I got to cut the O-ring groove in the outside of this. I machined the outside so it's concentric with the ID and the threads, so when I turn this, it'll turn the threads off a 1/16 of an inch up to a 1/16 of an inch. I'm hoping that'll give me enough travel that it should intergauge the teeth on the other gear. I don't know if you can see in here, but I offset, using a 3-jaw chuck, you can offset parts in the 3-jaw chuck too. I put a 50 thousandths shim underneath just one jaw, and that offset it about 50 thousandths, what I wanted, 50 to 60 thousandths. So I didn't have to take this chuck off and put a 4-jaw on and dial the part in. So sometimes you can cheat a little bit, saves a little bit of time. Once you get used to doing stuff like that, you can shim it in pretty quick. And then I just dialed it in end for end to make sure it was straight in there. And I just put a nut against the end of this with the tailstock, holding it tight against the end to keep this end from flopping around when I was turning this diameter down and cutting the O-ring groove. So you can kind of see, I think it kind of shows up, especially on this edge right here. You can see as it goes around, it goes back and forth because this diameter, the taper, runs true with the threads. The O-ring groove here and this diameter run together, so when this goes in the transmission and I spin it in there, the threads and the inside bore will move back and forth in the hole, you know, kind of elliptical as it goes around, so I can turn it up until the gear bottoms out in the other gear and then back it off just a little bit so it's got a little bit of play, and then I'll mill a slot in here for locking it in position, and that way once it's put in there, I put the tab in and the gear should be bottomed out. It shouldn't not work, if that is a word. But let me get this cleaned up and we'll get it put in the car and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, I've got my speedometer all put back together now. When I first put it in the car, I turned it to where I thought it was engaged in the teeth, and I marked it, and I had to mill a notch in it, and there's a little retaining tab on the side of the transmission that holds it in position. So I put it in there, and while I had it up in the jack stands, I started the car up, put it in gear, and let out on the clutch, and my speedometer didn't move. So I thought, I've got deeper issues than what I'm thinking it is maybe, but I think, and by then the pipes were hot underneath and everything, I couldn't do more that night. So today, I came back out, and I thought, well, I'm gonna try to rotate it further, that offset piece I made, and I rotated the full amount of offset I had, remarked it, recut a notch in it, bolted it back in there, and while I had it on the jack stands, it seemed to be working. I say that because it was kind of bouncing a little bit and stuff, so I don't know if it's like hitting hard on the teeth or something, I don't know. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take it for a drive now. I've got my app on my phone for speedometer, and you can see it's showing 0 because we're sitting still. So I'm going to see if, first off, my speedometer works, and I changed the gearing by 2 teeth, which should have increased it 6 miles an hour, and that should put me about right if it does 6 miles an hour more on the speedometer, because that's about how much I was off. So anyway, I'm going to put it in gear, and we're going to take off, and we'll see what happens. Whoa. I'll jump on the clutch there. Okay, you can see we're just kind of idling. I'm about at 800 RPM in first gear coming out of my drive, and it is showing about 10 miles an hour. Well, about 8 miles an hour, and that's roughly what my phone shows over here. So I'm speeding up a little bit. It's about 12 miles an hour, and they're showing 13. So I'm really close right there at low speed. So I'm kind of anxious to see once we get out on the road here what it does. So let's try to get up to a little faster speed that it would be more consistent at. See how it's kind of bounced a little bit? I don't understand that. I don't like that. It shouldn't be doing that. And according to that, we're running about 30 miles an hour, but my phone says 36 miles an hour, so it's still off 6 miles an hour. Changing that gearing did not change it. Plus the fact it's bouncing really bad. I don't like that. Something's not right. I don't know if that gear's worn weird in the transmission or what the deal is. But anyway, what I did, Jag sells a little box that bolts into your car, and your speedometer cable from your original speedometer screws into it, and then internally in the box it's GPS, just like my phone is. So what it does is it converts a GPS signal of the satellite to a mechanical function and makes the speedometer cable spin. And that eliminates having to go inside the transmission at all. I ordered one of those. It should be in hopefully the next week. And I'm probably going to switch that out because I don't like how this one's bouncing. Plus it's still off. I'm doing 44 and my phone says 53. So it's even worse now than what it was before I changed the gearing. So I don't like it. But anyway, that's it for now. I'm going to end this video, and when that other part comes in, I'll do a video installing it. So as always, have a great day. We'll see you on the next video.